You don't need the fanciest setup or background to speak truth. You don't need to look a certain way in order to speak the truth or to deliver a heartfelt message, human to human, unlike this world of technology and AI which may seek to replace that, although it may never truly fulfill. We live in a world with mass information, and oftentimes many different ideologies, many different agendas, people telling you to think this way or that way, and actually my agenda is no agenda, but that's still an agenda. The point is that the agenda is simply nature, because I say nature is the answer. It's clear, it's outright, it says what it is. But the question is, what does that mean? What does it mean to say nature is the answer? What I'm actually saying is knowledge. But what is knowledge? Well, if you limit that knowledge to one thing or another, it's limited knowledge, so how is it knowledge if you're ignoring all the rest of the knowledge that could be obtained? So knowledge is forever a journey of finding out. And well, what about in nature? When we're exploring about nature, there's always more nature that we don't see, that we have yet to discover. Life itself is a journey. It's one that has to be explored, and therefore you're going to have ups and downs. You're not going to know what to do at times. You're going to touch poisons and end up poisoning yourself, not realizing it's a poison. But when you do learn and when you do know, you know. And as you keep experimenting and learning, and so long as you are willing, you find the path and direction necessary for yourself, for your development, for your health, for what is right. Because these are all one and the same. What is right is what is natural, being that it supports your nature, being that it is intended within the universe. How many people want to put a definition on right? But if there isn't a definitive answer as to that question, then we can just do whatever we want, but then there's no need for knowledge, and there's no point of striving to do better, and there's no point of accuracy, or trying to attain a blueprint. As we recognize our body works in a certain way, or that the world works in a certain way, so why wouldn't we seek that blueprint to then know there is an intended right to this universe? Yes, that might seem difficult. Yes, there may be a lot of confusion, but it doesn't mean that we have to give up. Nothing ever said we had to give up except ourselves, in the same way it was just ourselves who said we could enslave another human being. Doesn't mean it's actually right. It doesn't mean it's actually moral. And we find out through time it doesn't work. It's not necessary for human existence. It's not sustainable. But yet everyone claimed that it was, and therefore legitimized its existence. Throughout history, people said, well, without slavery, what about this? Without slavery, what about that? They did not acknowledge the possibility that they can live free, and of a greater possibility than one of which they currently imagined. They were stuck in cognitive dissonance, a mold of their own mind, and therefore they would trap themselves, their consciousness, their evolution, and they were unable to attain true freedom, even in themselves, even while controlling other people. Isn't that interesting? The controllers are not free. Perhaps why they have to control other people to try to attain freedom within themselves, when in reality they must face their own shadows. You see this as a common trend among cops or people in power, narcissists, people who have an ego that they don't know how to address. They latch on to people wanting to be dependent upon them. They want people dependent upon them. They are insecure of themselves. They want to project upon others and find every means possible, whether it be material things or other people, to find their happiness. But they're never truly independent or free in their own mind. They live with a trauma that goes unaddressed. They live with shadows that they've never worked on. And so, this is the society we live in. People identifying as this, attaching to this, and yet, where is the sense of self? Where is the sense of nature? Oftentimes, my work is all about getting back to nature, but what does that mean? It actually means to take a step back, meaning if you are something, take a step back and realize something that you always were. Since you were very young, since you were born into this world, okay? As nature gave you, not as your parents, not as what you became, but actually what nature gave you and what nature intends to give you. It gives you the intention of breathing, the intention of thinking for yourself, but it doesn't mean that you use it. That's your choice. But it gave it to you, so why wouldn't you use it? It's your ability that allows you to have more ability, to know what to do with your ability. Nature gives you with all the tools necessary to survive and to thrive, but not everybody uses those tools, and then the people who do say, hey, this is the best way, you need to follow this way. But they may not be doing it because it's actually good for you. They may be doing it because it was good for them, or because it's a monetary gain for them to tell you to follow them. And therefore it becomes a material game and not so much a natural evolution game. We're stuck in these rabbit holes, and you may not understand exactly what I'm saying because you have to be able to break it down and understand it. But let me simplify it perhaps a little bit more. We live in a world where people talk a lot about health. They talk a lot about politics. They even talk a lot about religion. And people nowadays are often talking about AI. There's a lot of confusion regarding these topics because people say, well, in health, I study diet, I study different ways of living, and it seems like everybody finds studies to prove their point of view. After a certain while, you come to realize, wait, you can prove anything you want to prove because we have this mass information. And I don't really know what to do for myself looking at this world of everybody saying to do certain things. And then I look at AI and I say, man, how is AI going to develop? I mean, is it going to conflict with human beings? Is it going to cause problems with us? I mean, what do we do with this AI? And then we look at politics and we say, oh my gosh, there's all these different forms of government and different politicians to vote for, different laws to put in office. I mean, which one is actually right? Which one's actually going to work? We're wrapped in this confusion because we lack a sense of nature that is there all along. If you wouldn't be talking about health if you're already healthy. You wouldn't be talking about AI if you already feel like your life is fulfilled. And you wouldn't be talking about politics if you already had a government that you were fine to live under. So we talk about these things because we're confused, so much so because there's ignorance about. We don't know because we don't have direction. That's why we're confused. If we weren't confused, we'd have knowledge, we'd have direction. So we have ignorance because we have confusion. Confusion, equally so, deception or ignorance, they're all one and the same. The knowledge is not present. The direction is not present. Nature is not found, whether it's working with nature or nature just embracing it directly. One way or another, you have to work with it because it's there. You can't ignore it. So if you're looking at health and you say, man, we got to develop this drug. Is this drug working with nature? Well, then you're just supporting nature. You're just supporting what was there all along. And if we look at AI and we say, does this AI support our nature? Then we're saying, well, hey, we're working with what has always existed, what has always been there. And therefore, we're just allowing our nature to continue in its doing. Now, of course, we don't want to bring it to the excess. Maybe it will start doing things we don't realize it's doing. That's when we need more knowledge. Same thing with politics. We say politics, well, maybe we have to develop a law or a government that assists our nature. But does it actually exist in nature? Was it actually the product naturally of human beings? Or were we commanded and indoctrinated into such governments that we live in to think that they're the best over other nations in the world, to think that there's a certain blueprint or a way it should be done, or that people must have some sort of human authority over others when naturally we own ourselves? Perhaps the difference between health and politics is that, well, health, you are naturally given your health. Your health is simply your status. It's simply your being. You can be healthy. And in politics, you can say there's tyranny and versus freedom, but freedom is a natural thing. You say you're born with it. Tyranny is this thing that is clearly man-made because it only comes from government and overuse of power and corruption. So really, this whole distinction between right and wrong, or this whole distinction between what we should do and not do, is between the natural and unnatural. And Taoism perfectly describes this. It says, go with the way, let things be. AI, politics, and the health fields are always trying to change things in the reality. Religion does so too sometimes because it says you must study this book, you must do this thing. But it doesn't ever consider, should you think about this for yourself and reflect and come to your own authentic conclusion past all the programming? Because if you were born into thinking, having to think a certain way, you never really got to where you were authentically. completely. You have to find a way to unschool yourself, to get yourself out of that way of thinking and therefore come back to the basics or simplicity. But that can seem so difficult if everybody is being trained to think or act in certain ways, and you can argue that everybody is. So how do we find that return to nature? How do we find what is right, hence through our knowledge? How do we navigate at all? Well, there's a paradox in nature, because Taoism says that, well, to follow the Tao and to speak of the Tao, well, words can't describe it. My philosophy, naturosophy, which is the wisdom of nature, says, well, the book or its writings are man-made. How can something man-made describe something of nature? And if we look at the concept of anarchy, and we say it's simply no rulers, Greek anarchon, and you rule yourself naturally, you own yourself naturally, then there is no such thing as anarchy. It's simply nature. So both anarchy and politics are equally just man-made illusions because they're made by people, and what was always there was just nature. So there's this paradox in this life that if we aren't able to see it, we aren't able to see the bigger picture, we aren't able to see the greater wisdom. And people grow confused because they're wrapped in that box and they're not able to see outside of it yet. But if you keep understanding and keep looking past all this confusion and keep taking that step back, you will no longer be confused. You will see life clearly and simply for what it is, that is, most naturally. And nature really is simple. It has become complex through man looking at a tree and saying, hey, we can turn this into a symbol, we can turn it into this thing and that thing, and it has all these molecular compounds, but in nature, you simply embrace it. It gives you life, you know it helps you, you leave it be because, unless you need it for your own resource, you recognize you're just part of it, and there's trees everywhere. It's part of your natural domain. Right? But many people would like to say, well, these trees are here and it's owned by these corporations and it has this symbol and it's got to have this name on it, and then we complicate nature way past than we ever have. And then we wonder why we're confused, because we complicate things. And then we bring new kids into the world with a whole world they don't understand. And we pump them full of all sorts of drugs and foods that we can't even comprehend, ingredient lists we can't even read. No wonder why we're confused. We get ourselves into situations we don't comprehend because we are desperate and rush for relationships, or we rush for a certain drug because we're told to do so, but we don't actually know why we're doing it, and then we wonder why we're confused. We wonder why we want to end our lives in some cases because we never had a direction to begin with. So of course we have to put it to an end. But why should people put it to an end just because they didn't have direction? They can find direction. They have the capacity to think. They have the capacity to reason, to self-govern. Otherwise, we wouldn't have ended slavery in the 1800s. That was a sense of direction. If we were confused, we would have just maintained slavery. If we were confused, we would have just let the disease take us over. But in order to get rid of the disease, we clearly said we needed a direction, a way out of the disease. We needed to heal away from the disease. That was a path that led us away from confusion and toward truth, finding our truth for ourselves. And if it works for others, it's truth for them too. Now, it doesn't mean truth is subjective just because an individual finds out the truth for themselves. We all, as individuals, share certain things, and we also have some differences. Seeing those two paradoxes helps us see a bigger picture, which then helps us see the truth. So if you're not able to see the similarities or the differences, although this is a paradox, you cannot see the truth. The yin and the yang, the masculine and the feminine, the as above, so below. If you do not see this relationship, the fact that everyday people give those in power power, why are we focusing on giving people power or voting into some new politician when we are the ones giving them power? If we do not see this relationship, we miss the picture. Yet so often in politics, people are focusing on the politician. So often in religion, people are focusing on the external religion, what was told of them long ago by their parents or by some book, by some text that were translated tons of times. So often in AI, people are taking AI's word for granted now. People are accepting this as their reality with no question as to their nature of its replacement. I love AI. AI can be very helpful. It's a product of innovation, of freedom. But if it's left in the hands of the few, if it's being controlled, but we don't have control over ourselves and our tools, we become the tools of our tools, we lack control of ourselves, we can't no longer maintain AI, let alone grow it, let alone maintain control of ourselves, because AI is now taking control of us. We lack the consciousness, the knowledge, the ability to have our natural intelligence rule over artificial intelligence, that of whichever created it to begin with. And if we don't see that paradox between the natural and the artificial, and how they relate, and how actually they're integral to one another, we don't have knowledge. We can't live among it. We fall. We have chaos. And the same thing with health. If we don't see the place for drugs or technology in medicine, well, then we're not going to use it. And maybe it has a really good use, but we have to know that. We have to be able to say, wait, why did we develop it? We developed it because we thought it can help us. But it's not going to help us any longer if we don't have knowledge as to what it's doing. So it's all the matter of knowledge, and that is getting past this confusion. But if you noticed, all I did just now was speak of the paradox between the natural and the unnatural. And this helps us understand the entire world. And taking the step back to say, what is my natural health before I got into disease? What is the natural body before it ever hits disease? What is prevention before treatment? What is natural intelligence before artificial intelligence? What is nature before politics? We see a much greater reality. And again, there really isn't a need for politics at all because it doesn't really exist. Now, health is a given circumstance, and AI is just created with freedom. AI can be considered a tool as among a book or anything an individual can use, but politics is this grand scheme of this huge system we created, and even worse, it actually claims to be nature itself. And if you don't think that's the case, just look at how people treat it. They not only treat it like a religion, they treat it as if it's necessary for existence. Some other people they don't know. Some organized way of living, that they have to steal their money, and they're okay with their money being stolen, that they have to steal other people's money for some greater good benefit that you can't actually tangibly understand or know because it's for the greater good, it's for the collective. Every collective appeal has been made in World War II. For the greater good, let's do this. For the greater good, let's do that. Just order follow. Just believe in our authority as if human beings have authority over other human beings. And yet, where did it lead people? To the greatest amount of death ever in the world, a democide. Politics has no place in the world. AI and health absolutely does, because you can't destroy it. It's always going to be developed. It's always going to be created. But politics is a system that you're indoctrinated into, believe that it's necessary for existence. But people get together and voluntarily create things all the time. Why do they need violence in order to get together? Why do they need their money being stolen in order for things to be created? People can clearly do things without that. You say, well, how will the roads be built? Well, if there's a supply, the demand, there's going to be a supply. Do you not see that the market is actually the real government in this world? That people's minds actually determine this world, and that people can be educated, not just violently coerced into being right, and that there can be hundreds or thousands of solutions and not just one monopolized solution. So why have a centralized government with one monopolized solution for any one thing? Why believe it has to be done a certain way with a constitution and certain documents and founding fathers who were bestowed upon God? What gave them that right? What proof do you have? Other than because you believe it, but you don't know it. You were trained into believing it. And you think that the government was created by God. You think the government can be perfect if done a certain way. Well, what made it go wrong? And why see that that's the perfect way? And why not see that there's a nature that is way beyond that helps us see that we can evolve and all be morally responsible and rule ourselves voluntarily without any piece of paper? Because I didn't sign that contract. I didn't consent. It's all being able to see that you never, as a kid growing up in this world, ever was bestowed upon some government or some monetary system or some time. These are all man-made constructs, some of which you actually see as valuable, you voluntarily choose to use, money or time. But government, a lot of people don't like it in their lives, but they feel like they have no choice. People might say, oh, they feel beholden to time, but they can choose to live by sun and day. No one's coercing them, telling them that they don't have to do that, or that they have to do that. And the same thing with health. People have the choice. They may feel like they're obligated to do certain things, but they still have the choice. There's no violence behind the proceeding. The whole idea of anarchy, which again does not mean chaos, it means no rulers, is simply that of non-aggression. The idea that you should not promote legitimized violence. There's always going to be crime. The question is how much crime is allowed or permitted into society. And that is what the very thing that voluntarists or abolitionists or real anarchists are focusing on, is minimizing the overall harm done to society, creating the most sustainable world for the future. Every government has risen and fallen, creating the greatest amount of death in history, and yet that doesn't concern people. They want to continue that cycle, saying, well, there is a perfect form. There has to be. There has to be a certain way by human beings can monopolize and centralize power. But again, what gives them the power? Where did this power come from? Why not just look at nature's power itself? Does it not tell us that we can teach our fellow men and get together voluntarily and create solutions like the market has been doing? Do we not see that AI can challenge every law, and that innovation and freedom and the market is challenging every law? Because let's say we are, being able to replicate people's faces and voices through AI. There goes all the impersonation laws. Let's say we're able to get flying cars. There goes all the driving laws. Are we supposed to create new laws around that and change our laws regularly? We're going to create a bunch of problems in that process. It never is stagnant. It never is perfect. Are we supposed to then just be battling politics for the rest of our lives? You're creating a platform where all you need is one evil person to take charge, and all of a sudden they can change the whole world with a pen and paper. Does that seem natural or moral or legitimate to you? The fact that a pen and paper can change reality, alter reality, and millions of people should follow the authority of this one person because they are this authority? No, they should follow their own conscience. They shouldn't do what they know to be right, not wrong. But they will do what is wrong just because they're told to do so. This is the world we live in, and that's the root cause to the world we live in its confusion. It's people doing what they know they should not do. And equally so, people doing, not knowing what they're doing. And that is, again, ignorance on part of not having the knowledge or ignoring the knowledge that they already have. Knowledge is the solution, and it is the path to truth. It is the path toward freeing your own mind and freeing other people's minds. So question for yourself and think, because every question is a thought, and every question allows you to inquire into the nature of the universe. And if you're inquiring nature, you're asking the real authority of this world. Because that's nature. You can't escape it. You have to obey it. Any man who tells you must obey them, no, you don't. You absolutely do not. You have to obey yourself. You have to obey nature. And if you go against yourself, don't be surprised if you end up confused, depressed, suicidal, or any scenario in which you feel abandoned from your being. And we live with abandonment issues leading to self-loathing, leading to narcissism and all the mental problems of society. But yet most people say we don't know the cause of depression of this or that. Perhaps because it's rooted in this foundation that nobody is recognizing currently. But we can recognize it together as we learn more. Check out theliberator.us, theliberator.us, the Liberator 2 News. We're sharing this big solution to the whole world's problems, at least in the aggregate. Again, we can't get rid of all the world's problems, but we can definitely more understand ourselves and understand the root cause to the problem in the world, which is actually the centralization of power. Power can instead be with everybody, because that is self-government, and self-government isn't external government. Self-government is anarchy. It's nature. Thank you very much for watching. This is Corey Angelot. Nature is the answer.